Hi, we'd like to welcome you to the second in a series of webinars designed for airports and the aviation community. I'm Terry Bills, and I'm the Transportation Industry Manager here at Esri, and today I'm joined by David James and Michael Beavers, both from our aviation sales team. Today's webinar is focused on how you can create a system of engagement for your airport. And while this may be a new term for many of you, we hope at the end of the webinar you'll have a much clearer understanding of what we mean by a system of engagement. At heart, it's really a new way of thinking about how we implement technology in large organizations, and ultimately how we empower everyone in the airport with the data and the maps and the applications they need really to do their daily job much more effectively. Before we begin, I'd like to point out that we're recording this webinar, and while everyone will be on mute, there will be time for question and answers at the end of the presentation. You can type your questions into the question box, and we'll try to answer as many as time allows. And additionally, the slides which are part of this webinar will be available to you on the GeoNet group ArcGIS for Aviation, and we'll give you the link at the end of the webinar. So, well, we do have a lot to cover today. I'd like to go ahead and jump right in. And we want to give you a basic understanding of what we mean when we talk about a system of engagement. And then I'll turn it over to both David and Mike for them to discuss pressures that most airports face and how a system of engagement can help them transform into a connected and much smarter airport. And Mike will demonstrate a few of the typical applications associated with a system of engagement, and then we'll finish by answering as many of your questions as we can. So to start, a system of engagement is a fairly common term used in the IT literature, but one that we've taken and adapted to a particular pattern of technology implementation. It really comes out of two major trends within the IT industry. And the first has to do with the way that technology projects were implemented, let's say 5 to 10 years ago. These were often one-off, large custom implementations that took several years between concept and delivery, and quite often really did not meet the needs of the agency by the time that they were delivered. As a result, many in the industry began to look at more agile development methods that could deliver value much faster and with significantly less cost. The second major trend was that really many agencies began to look to technology as a way of doing more with less. And this was often referred to under the name of digital transformation, but many agencies came to see technology as the only way that they could meet their goals and objectives with declining budgets. So we began to look at how to make everyone within agencies more productive and how we could move from manual to digital processes. So the first thing to say about the system of engagement is that it's really designed to empower everyone within an organization with the information and the applications that they need to be more effective in their daily tasks. So we start with the first key requirement, how to make the appropriate data available to everyone in the organization. And we feel that there ultimately should be a single location for everyone with the appropriate permissions to easily access the data that they need. You can see a couple of examples on the right, the data and application portal at Reno Tahoe, and this is where everyone accesses not only the data, but their specific applications, as well as then the data portal at Avinor, the Norwegian Aviation Administration, and they actually use this data and application portal to also manage all 52 of their airports through that portal. And secondly, you should leverage your existing technology as much as possible. You already have a great deal of information and data in your organization, and the real trouble is that it's siloed and not always accessible to everyone who needs the data. As we all know, everyone has their own little data caches and spreadsheets and other databases, and those are not accessible across your organization. They're often segregated by office and by division, and you really can't bring that data together from across your organization to be able to make better and more timely decisions. So the second step is through APIs, being able to access the information from these various silos. The third requirement is to focus on the users and understand their very specific requirements. In most cases, these are not extremely complex, but rather the need to support daily inspections, daily work orders, very specific daily activities. This is really the heart of what we mean by a system of engagement. It's the targeted information products that are designed to provide data and maps and apps to the individual business units, which allow them to collaborate and to bring the right information to their analysis and to their daily work. So these are really very lightweight, tailored applications that are designed completely around very specific daily workflows. These can be something like a Part 139 application or even much simpler inspection applications. And the key here is that they're designed around the needs of very specific users. These are often quick and fairly simple to develop. The fourth characteristic is the notion that you really should use off-the-shelf technology and configure rather than customize your applications as much as possible. And this is designed to get away from the days of those large custom solutions, which are expensive to maintain over time. Rather, as much as you can, you should configure off-the-shelf technology to meet your needs. And this pushes the requirement to maintain the interoperability of the various technology components off to your vendors and not to your IT departments. And this leads to the final point that ultimately what we hope you're creating with a system of engagement is a sustainable technology environment. Not only is it much easier to maintain, but ultimately the goal is to transition to an environment of continuous innovation. As applications outlive their utility, they're simple to replace with the next iteration. So let's see how these concepts get translated into an airport context. So with that, let me turn it over to David. And David, take it away.
Hey, Terry, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, well, hi, everybody. This is David James. I lead Esri's airports practice, and really great to spend some time with you today. What I wanted to do before we took a sort of look at the system of engagement, I really wanted to step back a little bit and look at the airport industry as a whole. And one of the things that's sort of been developing over the last several years, actually, is this idea of a smart airport. This is an industry-wide concept that promotes the use of technology and innovation to transform airport operations and services. And at Esri, we believe that Esri's technology can be an important component of every airport's smart airport strategy. Here are some of the key goals of the smart airport strategy. Obviously, they focus on safety and security, and so using technology to make that process, those processes more efficient, and using technologies like biometrics, facial recognition. Obviously, we see lots of
David, unfortunately, I don't think we're seeing your screen. Let me make sure that you're.
There you go.
There we go. Okay. Yep.
Okay.
And we're seeing your notes version at the moment. So.
Okay. Let me just switch that. Is that better?
There we go. All right. Thanks.
Okay. Apologize for that. Okay. So to get back to some of these goals, customers are at the heart of the operation as part of this smart airport vision. We're seeing many airports deploy airport apps, very rich apps that create that very intimate connection between the airport and the traveler. In many cases, airports have created this idea of categories of travelers. So whether you're a business traveler, or a holiday traveler, a family traveler, a disabled traveler. They're based on that profile. They're able to offer you feedback through a mobile app that's tailored to your requirements. This idea of an airport being ultra connected, so going beyond just Wi-Fi and cellular, including things like beacons, all sorts of sensors, using CCTV feeds to do more than just capture pictures, but being able to actually track people individually. This idea of being very responsive and having systems that are more real-time and proactive rather than reactive. And as Terry said, to make this whole environment, this technology environment, very sustainable, very collaborative, and always on. So what are some of the other technologies that are driving this smart airport concept? Things like the digital twin or high definition imagery. Well, these are all technologies that Esri can partner with and leverage as well. And just to give you a few examples of sort of advanced combinations of these technologies and Esri's capabilities in an airport, the use of drones at an airport we know can be challenging, but we are aware of some airports now using drones to capture high definition imagery and then using Esri tools to process that imagery to do things like complete a survey of the airfield pavement condition using artificial intelligence and machine learning routines to do that. And then when it comes to things like location intelligence, as I've just mentioned, the combination of IoT, the Internet of Things, with beacons, mobile devices, and then being able to take the data that you can collect about the movement of people and perform some analytics, say around the retail operations at the airport, so you could understand over time the patterns, the movement of people, and correlate that to maybe point of sale data, so you can see, get a better understanding of why certain retail operations are generating more revenue than others based on volumes of traffic around that space at any one time. And so there are many other of these technologies, mega technologies, that are being adopted by the airports. In just about every case, Esri can complement the use of those technologies. And of course, we think that the Esri platform is ideally situated to support these smart airport strategies. It's very scalable. It's an enterprise class platform that allows you to scale from desktop all the way to what we call the geospatial cloud, where GIS is tightly integrated with all other systems at the airport. Of course, we also offer services like ArcGIS Online. We know it isn't a one-size-fits-all for airports, but we think we've got an architecture that can be adapted to suit just about every airport that wants to launch a smart airport strategy. What I'd like to do now is hand over to Mike to show you some examples of the solutions that we have available that would be exploited as part of a system of engagement.
Thank you, David. Can you guys hear me okay?
We can indeed.
And you're able to see my screen?
We can.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, this is Mike Beavers. David and Terry and I have been working in the aviation sector for some time now, and what we're seeing is a real upswing in, number one, the realization that there's great value in including location in your operations, and two, the technology that's available with Esri allows you to deploy these tools and share them quickly with everyone. So what I'd like to do is spend the next few minutes going over at a high level some of these tools and this technology. So let's take a trip. And we're going to start with Hub. And what you're looking at on my screen now is a website. And really, plain and simply, that's all it amounts to, is it's a website. But what it is a web-based or mobile-enabled, meaning it's responsive, location. It's a place, a launch pad really. It's a single access point for you to be able to have connection to some very focused applications that have location at their center that are focused on different business operations at the airport. And we're going to review some of those later. But what I'd like you to understand about this hub site, this website, is that, of course, it's secure. As you can see here, I'm signed into that website, and it can also be open, meaning I could share a number of hub sites with the public so that anybody who had, say, an initiative at the airport would be able to use it, stand up a website and then share that publicly, maybe for encouraging the public to be more understanding of noise impacts or some other community initiatives that the airport might want to engage in. So we'll go through these applications here shortly. Another thing that, in addition to the applications themselves, you could include things like videos, and I'll share the link to this video about how the Dublin Airport is actually using these tools in their operations. And another great value would be direct access to data. So I just clicked this obstacle data link, and what you're going to find is it's going to load a website where I could go in and then mine some information about a specific data set. In this case, it would be data about obstacles that exist across your area of focus, and it's the authoritative data. So if I were to look at this obstacle information, it comes from the FAA, and it's got all the data in it that would allow you to do some obstacle analysis. So there's lots of data sets that are freely available. Of course, you can download those things in their full set or through a subset. So in closing with the hub site, what I'd like you to do is you can just go Google Esri ArcGIS Hub, and this should be the page that shows up. So you can scroll down and look at some of the features and the overview of what Hub is really designed to do. It's share data like we showed you a second ago. You can also use Hub to create any number of websites you like, whether those are used internally or shared with the public. And you can create initiatives with those things where you can engage with different departments in the airport or with the public and collaborate. If you want to understand a little bit more about some of the features, you could certainly go to the Features tab and then read more about some of the initiatives and then the open data capabilities that are part of Hub and how you can share that information with your constituents or with the public. All right. Let's talk for a moment now about the airport's extension. And if you've not used it before, in a big picture, just imagine that the extension is connected to your desktop tools, and it really offers a great foundation for you to take your data, which most airports have lots of data, but they sit in a variety of places in different formats. So the airport's extension allows you to integrate all that data into a FAA compliant GIS database, and then you can use some tools built in with the extension to do some detailed automated data checks on the data that you integrate so that it is absolutely compliant with the FAA regulations. So when you update and upload that data to the FAA website, that you'll be guaranteed that that data is compliant and you shouldn't have any violations in that data. Let's take a look at a couple of the features that are part of the extension. And the first is, of course, the ability now to do those data checks so you can adhere to those industry standards, 18B specifically, and AMDB, and the ETOD. Also, you'll be able to generate obstacle surfaces and do analysis of those surfaces to see if obstacles actually extend into the approach surfaces at the airport, and I'll show you an example of that in a minute. And then be able to quickly edit and update that data, whether it's obstacle data or any other data that's part of your airport layout plan, and integrate that back into your GIS and your enterprise. And then the ability to then share that data and export it into different formats using these tools. And if you want more information about the extension, you can click the technical information here, even download a free trial. So I'd be happy to talk to you more about that after this webinar about how we can help you get started. All right, I want to spend just another minute or two and talk about obstacle analysis. So I want to show you an app that an airport is using that allows them to evaluate whether or not there's obstacles or terrain that extend into their protected surfaces. And this is a website. And again, it doesn't require any special software, just a web browser. And it's pretty obvious here that there's not a valid approach flying in from the east to the west here at the Burbank Airport. But let's go zoom into the other approach, and you'll see an aircraft following that Part 77 surface and making their way down to the runway. And using these tools, I generated this approach surface, and then with the scenario, which we certainly don't want to happen, but if in the event that this aircraft were to have to go missed approach or on takeoff were to lose an engine, by regulation, the airport must ensure that that aircraft, when it maintains its minimum climb gradient, would be clear of any of these obstacles. The obstacles I'm talking about in this case are rooftops, and you can see those here. So what we want to do with this tool is we took these obstacles and we brought them into the data set and did some quick analysis and rendered that in this 3D scene. What you can see are these red spheres that extend into the approach surface, the protected airspace. And what those actually are, they're actually buildings. And they're buildings the airport owns. And we were at this airport the other day, and actually it's true, there are quite a few buildings that are on airport property that extend into that approach surface. And using the tools, you could see, of course, that this airport or this obstacle extends by about 9 meters into the approach surface. So that's a great function and very valuable part of the tool set. Let's move over to the San Diego airport now. And as we make our approach and land at the San Diego airport, if you've ever been there, you'll also understand that terrain and buildings are certainly a challenge for a pilot landing at this airport. That's why they've displaced this threshold, so aircraft could be guaranteed they would be clear of those obstacles or terrain. Of course, as the aircraft lands and then taxis with taxi instructions, they're following detailed sign plans that are rendered in a 3D viewer. So there's value in being able to take the airport's extension and then render your sign plan, not just in 2, but in 3D, as you see here. Now, what would be of great value as a person going out and evaluating those signs, as you have to do when you submit those to the FAA, because the sign plans are complex and because there's lots of data in it, if you were to try and evaluate that sign plan looking at a 2D paper map, it would be difficult to see any errors. But in a case like this, it's very simple. A person who's out in the field doing that evaluation of that sign plan could then drive by that sign, look at the sign plan in this 3D viewer on a tablet, and then compare that to what the sign actually reads. And in this case, we can see an error because there's no 927 left. It's just runway 9 or 27. So it's a much quicker way for you then to get your data correct. So when you submit it to the FAA, then it's much more easy to have that data approved. And that's for the front and the back of the sign as well. So let's shift gears now. This is the core of the airport's extension, but I want to talk a little bit more about some workflow that happens at airports every day. And the vast majority of the airports, by regulation, the FAA expects you to go out and do airfield inspections. And many airports have been doing that for a long time with some real analog methods. And what I mean is, if I were an inspector, I'd go out with a form on a clipboard and I'd start doing my daily inspection and seeing issues if I see any and recording them on paper. And the challenge is twofold. Number one, taking that data that's in the paper and then converting it into a digital format and then warehousing it so that someone could gain access to it, or during no notice or regular audits, the FAA would then spend a lot of time and you would spend a lot of time and effort trying to recall that information so you could share it with the FAA. So what we're seeing is a big uptake by airports in using mobile technology. So I'm going to play a little bit of a role with you now. I'm an airfield inspector, and I'm going to go out and I'm going to do an inspection at this airport. And again, I've got a tablet in my truck, or I'm using my mobile phone. And these apps can fit on an iOS or an Android, or as David says, I can't believe it, but I even get to use my Cricket phone. And you certainly can. So let's play that role now of the inspector. And I'm just going to expand this part of the view so that you can see me conduct my inspection. So I'm going to do a daily inspection, and the date and time can come directly from that device. So it makes data entry much quicker, and the possibility of errors much, much less. So when I do my inspection, I just check all those things that I'm going to inspect that day by tapping. Maybe I didn't do a wildlife inspection or a night inspection. If it was a night inspection, I would. And maybe I don't see any issues. But if I do, of course, it's required of the form, so I can't skip that. If I say, yes, what is the issue? Then I've got a pick list of those issues that I'm required to inspect. And if I see an issue, say in this case for a fueling facility, again, if you don't select it, then it shows the error. Now, these fueling facilities only have specific things they could select. So in this case, I noticed a fire extinguisher that either needed service or needed to be taken out of service and replaced with another extinguisher. Now, the next part of the form is important to understand, and that is, I understand based on urgency, the value of it being low, medium, or high urgency. And if I were to say, tap that and say, I believe it's a highly urgent issue, the minute I submit this observation, the airfield supervisor and anyone else with secure access would receive a push notification, an email saying an urgent issue has just been discovered at the airport, and a link to that issue in this dashboard could be sent through the device, and then someone could see what that issue is and when it was discovered and where. As the inspector, I could go take a picture. So I would take a picture of that fire extinguisher in question and locate on the map actually where that fire extinguisher problem exists. Or I could use my GPS and just click here, and it would take me directly to that location where my phone's located at that point. So I'll just click on the map where that fire extinguisher is located. And I'm not able to resolve that issue. And if that issue requires a service request, I could click here, and it brings up a form where then I could fill out information about the service request. So you could link this inspection to an associated application, whether it's a simple form like this, or maybe you've got a more detailed asset management system. You can quickly link this inspection to that system. And maybe it requires a NOTAM. In this case, it wouldn't, but we'll say it does require a service request. And if it didn't need a NOTAM, then we could issue the NOTAM there, and then even go to a website where I could generate that NOTAM if I had the right authority to. So I've just quickly entered in what's wrong and that I need to replace that extinguisher. You can even use voice to text to do that to avoid any of these issues. I could sign it. And then once that form has been filled out, as the inspector, I want to submit it. And as it is submitted, it's going to be automatically written into a database if I'm connected to the internet or through my data plan on my phone. If not, that's not a problem, because you can take these apps offline. And that's the case with the vast majority of the applications, is that they're able to take them offline. Now, why this interface is important to the inspector is many times inspectors would go out to the airport during the inspection, and they might see an issue that already has been reported but not resolved. So this dashboard can be consumed by the inspector, and I understood maybe I went out and inspected this, or another inspector inspected this and discovered that issue with that fire extinguisher before, and it would be something that I wouldn't have to report on again. Same thing with lights. If there were a series of lights that were out on the runway, if there were more than 3, then those might be tagged. Some airports originally were tagging those lights with actually flags, and now the tags appear in the app itself. So then an inspector or maybe the supervisor at that airfield could then look at these issues by priority, high, medium, or low, and then examine the entire list, or based on categories, we could then just see each of those, and then information would show up about it. So the value, what we've seen in a lot of airports, is the ability to then to quickly stand up and configure this application and actually get approval through the FAA for this to be an authorized method to collect information during your airfield inspections. Now there's a variation on that theme, and many of the applications that you're going to see and are part of this suite of tools can be quickly reconfigured and used for different use cases, like this airport that has an intermodal facility nearby. So what happens is shipping containers come in and the airport would park these at this laydown facility, at this intermodal facility, and they want to be able to understand and capture information about how many days a specific parking spot is occupied and by what. So the person who is offloading this shipping container would use an app similar to the one I showed you earlier and just drop in quick information about that container, when it was in and when it was out, and then the fees associated with it, and take a picture as well. So you're going to see that common variation using the same tools that I created for this airfield inspection for things like this. So the dashboard becomes a really valuable, easy to configure tool that's part of this suite. All right, let's talk about BIM, Building Information Models. And airports, like other large facilities, are now managing a lot of their infrastructure and receiving the information about these terminals and the buildings across their campuses in a Revit model or in a BIM format. And because there's been some cooperation now between Autodesk and Esri, we have the ability, and you as an airport have the ability to read your Revit data directly inside your GIS, and that's what you're looking at here. This is a Revit model of the Houston terminal, this new terminal that's been built. And I created a scene package and shared that in a mobile viewer, and information about anything at that airport in that Revit model is directly available through a web browser. So we'll zoom inside the terminal. Let's have a look at a scenario where, say, anything as simple as a power unit, maybe this power plug, this is inoperative, and someone goes and inspects it, and they can use a form like this then to report that information quickly. And with an airport inside terminals like the one here at Dallas, there's a really dense network of infrastructure that's interconnected. And again, I want to make that clear that using your desktop tools, I've taken that Revit model and I directly read it inside my ArcGIS Pro, my desktop tools. So if you're one of the GIS staff who actually does work with Revit, you can read that data directly inside your Pro model. So as I zoom in, you'll notice the exterior and the interior shell, and maybe I wanted information during or after construction about it, any of these assets or the infrastructure, and you can then see that by a simple click, you have access to that, and maybe even access to the Revit model or an as-built drawing. Or once the building has become occupied, it could be connected to an asset management system. And where that takes us now is into a new world where now we can actually deploy tools, in this case indoors, to help manage the operations at your airport, both indoors and outdoors. And what you're looking at here is actually an indoor model of that very same 3D model of that Houston terminal that's been built. And this application called ArcGIS Indoors allows you to take the data that originally sat in Revit and in CAD and then migrate it into an indoor model that then allows you to unlock some capabilities that I'll show you now. And imagine those really being important for your staff at the airport and even for the customers, the passengers who go and actually use your airport. So I'm going to run a scenario with you. You can just look at some asset information, and again, this could be used for staff either on a mobile device or on a web browser or in a kiosk. And I could just look at some of the places and things that are there. You could zoom into any one of the details and have a look at it. You could see information about it and then share that with someone else, or maybe get directions to it. So I'll just want to maybe share information or send directions about that. I'm going to take myself maybe from where I was located here and then quickly generate directions to this location. And you can see that it's quite a walk. It takes me a little while, but using these tools, I could quickly understand and identify those facilities and assets. Another would be where you've got an inspector who has to go out, and at the airport, there's lots of infrastructure that requires regular inspections, like fire extinguishers, AEDs, and other things. So an inspector could use a tool like this, and maybe I would be able to report that there's an issue with this fire extinguisher. and I could send that in an email. And in this case, I want to send that to David James and say, David, he need to go out and then do service on that specific fire extinguisher. And rather than trying to give it directions on how to get there, which could be convoluted, all David would have to do would be to open this email, tap that URL, and in his mobile app, he could do the very same thing. He could get directions to it, or then fill out an inspection form. And that form could be one like this. And it might look similar because it's very similar. It's using the same technology that I use for the airfield inspections. But in this case, I can locate where that extinguisher is located. And then through quick drop downs, I could then share that, and then it would be connected to my asset management system.
Hey, Mike, that's really good. I think we should probably switch back to the presentation if we could, Terry.
Glad to do it.
Yeah, those are great examples. Thank you.
All right, you're welcome.
All right.
Okay. Can you see my
There you
screen?
go, Yep. Yeah, we can.
Okay, good. So thank you, Mike. Some great examples. So we've considered the idea of a smart airport. We've seen some great examples of how Esri's technology can be applied, to achieve some of those smart airport goals. What I want to do now is take a deeper dive around this idea of a system of engagement for airports. What we really do is we focus primarily on 4 very common business priorities that we see at just about every airport. And those are safety and security, customer service, operational efficiency, and revenue growth. The order may change, but typically we see these as common high priorities for all airports that we meet with. The system of engagement really introduces a new way of thinking. And I would say the approach isn't traditional IT on steroids. It promotes a mindset that uses new technologies to deliver innovative airport technology services faster and more cost effectively. It doesn't advocate for the replacement of existing systems. It's designed to integrate with existing systems and to leverage valuable data in new ways that can deliver value. The SOE culture is dynamic, agile, and focused on delivery at speed. And SOE initiatives should be innovative and always open to the next wave of emerging technologies. Of course, we understand a lot about how our users use the Esri platform. And many of you have probably seen this sort of slide before. And what we've developed as part of that understanding is this framework, 9 patterns of use. And with these 9 patterns of use, Esri has developed literally hundreds of reusable apps that the SOE focuses on how we can utilize those apps to deliver very user-specific focused apps for your airport. And to Terry's point, a key thing here is these apps should be configured, not customized. And that's the idea of going with the grain. So we can provide you with a set of best practices, how to undertake that configuration without undermining our ability as your vendor to support those apps and make sure they're sustainable, and that we don't put an extra load on your local IT shop, in terms of supporting these apps. Again, Mike's just shown you a whole bunch of examples of solutions that we've identified working with airports. Here are some others. They really fall into 2 categories. They're web-based dashboards and map display or 3D display capabilities. Again, they're secure web. They don't require any special software, so you can expose them to executives that don't have sort of high levels of skill around using GIS, but they can still consume valuable information. And there's also lots of mobile apps that allow you to either collect data in the field or just gather, understand information when you arrive at a location. Some of the characteristics of our system of engagement, really, the most important goal will be to improve collaboration and data sharing across the enterprise. And the Esri platform combined with user-focused apps will quickly enable you to achieve this goal. Here are a couple of the guiding principles we always leverage as part of our SOE program. Data is key. And again, we want to leverage existing data and just use it in different ways. We're really focused on accelerated delivery. So to give you an example, recently an airport we were working with, we met with them towards the end of November, and by early January, we were delivering a brand new Part 139 solution, which they successfully demonstrated to the FAA and secured FAA approval to use and adopt that mobile tool, fully integrated with their asset management system. So delivery schedules are weeks, not months or years. It's a very agile process. And what we mean by that is we work very closely with end users to understand requirements and ensure that the solution is exactly what they're looking for. So we work hand in hand with end users and subject matter experts at your airport. We leverage pre-built solutions, as we said. Security is baked into these Esri apps from the get-go as a forethought, and they're really designed to be always on, ultra reliable. Part of the sort of secret sauce around the system of engagement, we work with you to identify what we call high value, low effort applications. That's what we like to focus on first. We work with you to establish a value, a business value, and then obviously based on our experience and knowledge of our tools, we can put together a very aggressive, low effort program to deliver those solutions. But again, we focus on high value, low effort. The SOE process or approach is really quite simple. Initially, there's a discovery process, 2 tracks, a business track, so a series of discovery workshops focused on different work groups at the airport, and then a technical track where we conduct workshops with your IT staff to understand all of their IT strategies and policies. Typically, those discovery programs, those discovery activities last 3 or 4 days. We then take all the findings from the discovery and build that into our SOE plan, which typically can be delivered within several weeks, probably less than that. And then it's your plan, it's your execution plan. And you can either execute it yourselves, if you've got the expertise and capabilities at the airport to do that. You can execute it with Esri. Esri can lead, undertake the execution totally, or you can engage one of Esri's business partners to do the execution. In terms of the discovery and who we meet with, there's a sort of long list of different departments potentially or work groups we could engage with at the airport. What we've found over time, all of these work groups typically have needs that can be satisfied by GIS in some way. And, you know, we would tailor this based on each airport that we meet with. In terms of the IT track, these are some of the topics we would cover with your IT group. You know, review security policies, that's always a very important topic. Look at things like change management policies and the availability of data from other systems. Here are some of the deliverables from the SOE plan. There's a system architecture. We look at training strategies for your organization, and that includes the end users as well as sort of subject matter experts in the GIS group. We look at different adoption strategies because sometimes we know there's a sort of resistance to change in some organizations. So we work with you to make that change process, that adoption easier for an organization to complete successfully. We provide a schedule and implementation plan We help you with branding so that these apps and web content, they're personalized to your airport. We make recommendations about maybe how you're organized, maybe some governance recommendations. Obviously, we look at software requirements. And ultimately, this plan is yours. And as I said earlier, you can choose to implement on your own in a hybrid model with Esri or with one of our business partners. And so we've covered a lot of ground, but just to recap, and Terry stated this earlier, this smart airport system of engagement is a very agile, app-centric approach to connecting people, workflows, and data. Some of the key takeaways are it delivers user-focused apps that enhance performance. It provides fast access to information and leverages existing systems and data. So Terry, that's about all that I've got. I know you've got some activities to close out the webinar. I'll hand over to you.
Okay, thanks, David. So we'll go ahead and we'll open it up for questions. A number of you have already typed in your questions, but this is your opportunity. And let's get started with some questions. We will, at the end, we'll give you links to where you actually can go see the slides. We'll put those, as I mentioned, up in the GeoNet, ArcGIS for Aviation group. And we'll also give you some links to some other sites as well. So let's start off and let's see. There's a question having to do with the airport extension. Obviously, you talked a great deal about compliance with FAA. How about with Eurocontrol and ICAO similar requirements? You're able to use the airport extension to similarly meet foreign aviation administration requirements?
Yes, you can. Yeah, there's parameters that are set up to meet those requirements as well.
Okay.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah, and then there's another, I guess, wanting to know about how has the extension kept up with the latest FAA airports GIS requirements, and maybe if you could actually speak to some of the specific updates, or we can, if you want, we can answer that down the line, but if you want to take a stab to start.
Sure, yeah, this is Mike. We definitely have certain standards that, like Part 13 and Part 77 and these different approach procedures, definitely you can modify those parameters and generate approach surfaces to meet those specific expectations. There are some new ones that are coming out, and the development team for the airport's extension and the approach surfaces are constantly working on keeping up with these changes. So some are in the process of being updated, but most of those parameters are already set. And what I'd like to maybe do is, if you have specific questions about those types of approaches and these, maybe we could have a breakout session where whoever wrote this and anyone else interested, we could have another screen share where we could take a deep dive and talk more specifically about those approaches and how to do some of that analysis with the tools.
Yeah, and I guess adding to that, it probably makes sense that somewhere down the line, we probably want to do another webinar, which is really focused on the airport extension. I know that there's been, we've done a couple in the past, but as we make changes, it's always good to sort of update everyone on those changes. Let's see, there's another question, and it says really having to do regarding with the mobile inspection app. And is there a possibility to connect specific survey to existing point feature, for example, a manhole or light fitting, instead of picking the location or taking GPS coordinates? So I guess it's, could you pick the asset from rather than taking the GPS from either the phone or the tablet? Great
question. Absolutely. Yeah, there's two real major modes that we talked about, and The first I showed you was generating an observation, which is a new record in the database, and the other would be to go out onto the airfield with a mobile app that you could then inspect existing infrastructure, say lights, for example. So with the mobile app, you can have that infrastructure, that light, for example, set up in the app itself in the map. You could tap it, and then you could update information in a form linked directly to those existing features. So that's true. Yes, you can do that.
Okay.
And Mike, it's important to have both modes, because some of the discrepancies that you have to identify are not related to existing infrastructure. So for FOD or wildlife reporting,
fuel inspect, any of that, exactly.
Okay, and let's see, there's a question really relating to IoT data and perhaps, sort of being able to do such things as track passenger movements and so forth. Can you maybe speak to kind of, sort of how different components can be used for things like passenger flow and checkpoint operations and so forth?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because airports have and are building real detailed networks that contain information that are part of your location positioning systems like Wi-Fi. You can then associate an individual MAC address for whatever device is connected to that network, and then you can cache that information about that device in a data store, which then you can see in real time, maybe the movement around the terminal, indoors or outdoors, using location positioning systems. That blue dot could then sit in a database that you could look and do analytics on later, or see the movement or clusters of those devices or people in real time, and then do some analysis on, say, for example, on this date and time at this TSA line, what was the dwell time or the wait time. So you could start forecasting based on the date and the time. Maybe I'd want to position more TSA at a specific area, or in the event of an issue where you want to know how many people are in a specific part of the terminal, you can also do that sort of analytics in real time and then historically. So yes, you can do that.
And what we're seeing, Terry, is lots of advances in terms of Wi-Fi capability. It's really improved over the last few years, and so many of these Wi-Fi systems, like some of the latest systems from Cisco, allow an airport with a very dense network of access points to collect all that movement data and aggregate it, load it into a warehouse, and then use Esri's analytical tools to slice and dice that data to gain better insight. And of course, we've got a brand new product called Analytics for IoT. It's an extension to ArcGIS Online, which is a great tool for doing that sort of analysis.
Yeah, and just to reiterate that all of that analysis takes place in the cloud, so you don't have to operate the hardware and on your
maintain that infrastructure.
Yep, exactly. So, all right. Well, so there's a couple of people that have sort of given us some ideas for future webinars. Someone was very much interested in taking you up, Mike, on the breakout session on airspace surface management, and then another suggested he'd like to see a webinar about really sort of BIM and Revit, and maybe taking a much deeper dive into that. And then for our European colleagues, we do want to announce that there's an airport GIS exchange at the Dublin airport, which will take place September 16th and 17th. And there will be a call for presentations again for our European colleagues. And I guess there's another question again, sort of reiterating about the FAA requirements with the extension, but it actually says, do you plan to adapt your product to European requirements, Euro control? And you want to, again, reiterate that we do.
That's true, yeah.
Yeah, I guess, Terry, so we've got one really successful customer in Norway that is now has a fully, as I understand it, fully
80Q compliant.
80Q compliant Esri system. And I know, you know, that will probably be featured at the event in Dublin. Be good to learn from that group about exactly how they've achieved that. You know, and we're always speaking to airports right across Europe about how they're using Esri tools to comply with those local standards.
Yeah, agreed. And so we do continuously talk to both ICAO and Eurocontrol, and really do try to make sure that we're meeting the latest requirements. There's another question having to do with do we have an off-the-shelf app that specifically addresses the OSHA safety requirements?
Yeah, and keep in mind that those safety requirements are found at the OSHA site, and using these configurable tools, then you could set up those inspections so that they meet those parameters. Like I did with the airfield inspection, you would be able to do the very same thing, say with extinguishers or any other OSHA compliant regulations. So yes, you're able to configure those inspection tools so that they could meet those requirements. And when we say off the shelf, in that case, I simply understand what those requirements are, and then I can configure using some very intuitive tools how to collect the information that then is compliant with OSHA standards.
Okay, great. Well, I think that's going to wrap up the number of questions. I'd like to point you to one. Here's the link for the, and I believe Nadine put it in the chat window as well, the link for the ArcGIS for Aviation GeoNet community. We would direct you to that. That's a great venue. You can ask questions. You can see some of the latest posts and developments we generally put there, and it's really designed to create a forum for discussion within the airport and aviation community. And then the second link that you see, yep, I'm sorry.
Terry, this is Mike. Yeah, I sent a link to the upcoming AAAE Geospatial Conference. We'll be there. If anyone is attending, we'd be glad to visit with you face-to-face if you're there.
Yeah, indeed. And then the second link here is actually, we do have a really sort of an ebook or a white paper, if you will, going into a little bit more detail about the system of engagement for airports. So if you, I'd certainly encourage you to take a look there, and then please feel free to reach out to us. So with that, we'd like to thank you all for attending today, and we hope you'll join us for the future webinars in this series. And again, thanks, and have a great day. So thank you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.